Welcome to Friday Friends, RI Elder Info's weekly look at the organizations and individuals providing resources for Rhode Island seniors, caregivers, and professionals.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. It is 9 o'clock on Friday, and you are watching me, Deb Burton, Executive Director of RI Elder Info, the nonprofit that brings you Friday Friends every Friday at 9, where we talk about information and resources that you or someone you know needs to know about. And we are having a conversation today that is very timely and very important in today's society. So make sure you hit the like button, the share button, the bells, the whistles, all those social media cues that say, hey, check this out, because this very well could apply to you or someone you know. So as you all know, I can't do this without the support of our sponsors. So a big thank you to Point 32 Health, as well as United Healthcare, and of course, McCarthy Law. Here's a minute with McCarthy.
Here at McCarthy Law, we practice in the areas of estate planning, long-term care planning, elder care law, and residential real estate. Our focus is really on providing peace of mind to our clients.
If you're interested in scheduling a consultation with our office, you can feel free to reach out to us at 401-541-5540. You can also reach out via website at www.mccarthylawri.com. You also should check out our social media, both on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for some helpful tips and tricks.
Welcome, Samantha. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I was hoping today we might be able to have a conversation around situations where we are aging together, but not necessarily married.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a common thing that we see. There's a lot of people who, whether in a long-term relationship or sometimes like second relationships, or they both have met later in life and have their own children, and for all intents and purposes, they look like they may be married to the rest of the world, but access to services, resources, care, all of those things can definitely be different when you're not actually married.
Yeah, one of the tip-offs for me is when someone calls and says, I need to know about my mom's boyfriend or girlfriend or dad's girlfriend or dad's boyfriend. And it becomes very clear that there's not a specific legal relationship between the couple.
Yeah.
And so what are there protections if one of the couples needs help, needs care?
I mean, one good thing is in Rhode Island, you're not married unless you're married. And so if you're not legally married, then all of the assets of the the partner who's not needing the care, they're not considered available to pay for care. So of course we need to look at commingled assets and joint assets, but short of that, especially in couples who've kept the finances separate, we don't have to consider all of the assets of both people available to pay for care, whereas in a married couple we do. So while it is not always the best option, there are times where people actually get divorced so that they are not married for purposes of being able to qualify for care, that may be needed. The other thing that we have been recently utilizing for some clients is care breaks, where if you're not married, you can actually get paid to care for your partner in your home. And so they actually, when we were meeting with them recently, shared that sometimes people get divorced and then are able to qualify for that program too. But, the care may look the same, and on the outside it might look the same, but it really is very different when you're unmarried.
I would say let's not get a divorce until after you've talked to someone such as yourself.
So I never advocate for it. We always say, let's talk about all of your options, right? And oftentimes it just doesn't feel like the best option, even if financially it's the best option. I can say in my over 10 years of doing this, a very small, less than a handful of times has that been the best option. And sometimes it's because you actually are living apart, but you're married. And so, you have separate lives. But, you know, in the plethora of things that are available, we want to look at what assets are available, what resources are available. How do we best leverage what we've, you know, worked so hard for in order to get the care that we need? And so sometimes the fact that you're unmarried, while people think that that could be a detriment in the need for senior care, it's not always. Sometimes it ends up, you know, financially putting you in a better position.
So if a couple has been together for a very long time, are they mandated to be considered common law married?
No.
Is that a real thing?
Not in Rhode Island. You can't force someone to be common law married. I mean, generally speaking, in Rhode Island, if you hold yourself out as married, if people think you're married, I mean, you may meet certain eligibility requirements for common law marriage, but that's something that you have to proactively seek. The state's not just going to say, oh, you are married because of these things. There are states where it works that way, but Rhode Island is not one of them.
And so if you're not actually married, there could be implications in relation to even like claiming Social Security benefits, things like that down the road too, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so that's where this gets to be like kind of a tricky analysis, right? Is if we don't get married, because sometimes clients come to us with the question of, should we get married? Here's our situation, here's our care needs, right? So maybe it's not the best thing today because we don't want all of the assets to be considered available to pay for care, especially for pursuing Medicaid eligibility, whether for in-home care or for community-based care. But long term, if you're married, you know, for a period of time, you can get your spouse's Social Security. If that was higher than yours, maybe you can get your spouse's pension. And if you're unmarried, you can't. So we have to look at the analysis of both of those things to make sure both people are being considered, both needs are being considered, and which one ends up more financially beneficial.
That makes sense. You can't approach this kind of thing willy-nilly. Now, if a couple, you know, sometimes later in life, we find our love. And so you might move into your partner's home, or they into yours. Is that protected if one has to go into long-term care? Are there any, like with married couples, there's some protections. Does that also work for the unmarried?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to look at there, you know, whether title was transferred, was the person who moved in added to title or not. Generally speaking, your primary residence is an exempt resource for purposes of Medicaid eligibility right now, but we, you know, largely know that Medicaid can file a lien against the property through probate after someone has passed away in order to recover. So there's a lot of nuances that come into play. Likely we can preserve that home, at least for now, for the person who needs to still reside there so that they don't lose their home. But that often requires some sort of title shifting and some advanced planning if the person who needs the care is not the person who's on title to the property.
And I would imagine that once you start adding in adult children and other folks, now all of a sudden there's a lot more layers to the cake.
Yes, it gets very complicated. And this is definitely where if you have, you know, 5 or more years before you think you may need long-term care, you have a great planning opportunity, especially in these relationships where we have, you know, children from prior relationships or prior marriages. If you put the property into a trust, you can do everything you want now, make sure that you can preserve it as your primary residence. Maybe the residence for your partner who you don't want to actually give the house to because you want your children to inherit, but you want them to be able to live there for however long, maybe the rest of their life. Give them the right to do that, but then ultimately, you know, if or when the property is sold or when you pass away, it goes to your kids. All of those are planning opportunities through a trust, which we do all the time, but generally requires that 5-year look back. And so if we don't have that 5 years, which, you know, shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? Like plenty of people come to us and haven't done that planning, and that's okay. We're going to do the best we can with what we have. We can still save quite a bit, but sometimes the exceptions that allow us to save things mean adding the other partner to title, for instance, because they've lived there for a period of time. And now, you know, we have that second layer of, well, what happens for the children?
Right. And by not being married, there may be the added eligibility for the state-funded services that the unmarried partner may be eligible to be that care provider and get paid. So there's, I mean, Not always, but it's
I
nice.
think, I think the thing to know is there is no right or wrong answer. There's no, it's better to be married or it's better to be unmarried. They both have their own, pluses and minuses, and you do cost benefit analysis of each, and then based on your situation, decide what makes the most sense. Because if the care needs immediate, we're looking at a different set of facts and circumstances than if we have some time and we're doing some advanced planning.
Yeah. It's always better to plan far ahead. Is there a point where you're looking at planning for your long-term care needs? Is there a point where it's just too early to plan?
I don't think it's ever too early to have the conversation. It's certainly, if someone comes to me in their 50s and says, I want to put my house in an irrevocable trust because I think I might need long-term care in the future and I'm worried about those costs, we're going to have a real conversation about, does it make sense at that age? Well, likely you're still working, you're still contributing to your savings and your retirement, you're still actively acquiring assets. Does it make sense to give up title to this property? And who do you trust to manage that? Sometimes the answer is yes, it makes sense all day long, right? But for many people, it's, that doesn't feel quite comfortable. I'm not there yet. I don't want my kids to get involved if I want to sell, or, I don't want to give up the right to take a mortgage or an equity line, different things. But we are always having the conversation about these things with our clients at about that point, like 50s, 60s, thinking about retirement, because they may or may not feel like it's the right time to actually pull the trigger on that kind of aggressive planning, but they at least now know it's a thing, right? Because there's so much misinformation out there that we want to really dive into what are the specific things that are applicable to this specific person and what is just really fear-based info that's out there that we don't need to be worried about. Because then, maybe we talk about it at 50 and then now they're 65 or 70 and they remember, oh, I had a conversation. Let's revisit that. So these things need to change over time as life changes. I will say, and I just had a conversation about some people who have early onset Alzheimer's, dementia, those kinds of things, then we want to plan a little bit sooner. So maybe 50 is not too young. It's never too young to do some sort of planning, but it may be too young to do really aggressive planning. But just educate yourself so you can decide when that right time is for you.
And then so I'm in that 55 to 60 age. This is stuff I talk about every day. So like nobody would be shocked about me having this conversation at a cookout this summer.
Yeah.
So if I make decisions now, could those be changed in, say, in 20 years? If I wanted to say, I did that then, or is it kind of once it's done, it's done?
So many of the decisions can be changed. Not everything necessarily, but there's kind of backdoor ways. So powers of attorney, for instance, healthcare and financial, you can change those at any time so long as you have the capacity to do so. So if you understand the objects of your bounty, you know who your people are, you know where your bank accounts are, you understand your house, what year it is, you know that you want these people to be your helpers, you can always change those. So there's a lot of security in knowing that you have something in case something happens that you're not anticipating, but you still have the power. Wills can be changed, revocable trusts can be changed, again, as long as you have the capacity to do so. Sometimes your power of attorney that you've named for a financial power of attorney or a durable power of attorney can also make a trust for you, for instance. So you want to be careful about the interplay of, do you want them to have that power or not? And what caveats are you making to those powers that you're giving? The one thing that becomes a little bit less changeable is an irrevocable trust, specifically if we're doing it for asset protection for long-term care planning purposes. And there are backdoor ways we put in there to say, well, you're not giving up 100% control, but largely on paper, you are giving up control and you do not, in any really significant way have the ability to change that going forward.
So it sounds like I am a forever romantic and love. So whether or not somebody is or isn't married, it sounds like having those conversations and planning sooner rather than later is a good choice.
It's always a good choice to have the conversations. And even if we're not talking about asset protection planning, when you are someone's loved one and you have to make a difficult decision related to their care or related to their medical needs, if you have some idea of what they may have wanted, it is always easier. So I think part of the thing about planning is it's not just about you. You're giving a gift to your family and your loved ones. It is a blessing whether you are a partner, a spouse, an adult child, to have some idea about what that person you love would have wanted in this situation if they can no longer make that decision for themselves. The other thing is when you're having the conversation where you're not faced with the immediate crisis, it's a lot easier to think more clearly about what is reasonable and, kind of put together a plan of what you may want.
And that way too, when you talk about a gift, I think of it in terms of, you may have your life partner and then your children. And if there's some kind of acute medical crisis where decisions need to be made about what kind of care you would want, you don't want to have those two parties fighting each other in that time, because you don't want to be in that situation. Question for you: for a very long time, our friends in the LGBTQIA community were not legally allowed to get married.
Yeah.
At present, in Rhode Island, it is allowed. Are you able, for those couples who might have been long-term couples but did not get married because they were not legally allowed to, are you able to help them now for their planning as a couple going forward?
Yes. We help lots of LGBTQ families, whether they are legally married or are not. And it to be honest, is the same analysis we're making with non-LGBTQ families to say, okay, your love needs to be honored, and how do we protect your relationship and what you've worked so hard to build? And that is financial, but it's also emotional, right? And so we're taking into account all of that to say, how do we make sure you're both taken care of and provided for in the best way possible?
That is wonderful. I know that the title is Resources for Unmarried Couples, but I feel like it's love is love. And
I love love. Yes, absolutely. I think love doesn't see those boundaries. And so regardless of what your family looks like, it's important to have these meaningful conversations and put together a plan that feels right for you.
And so if people are watching, is the best thing to do to give you a call at the 401-407-5975?
Yeah, you can certainly give us a call. Our first step is to do a discovery call to learn a little bit more about you and your needs and your questions and make sure we can help. The other thing is our website has a lot of resources on it and free resources, some free handouts, things like that to help kind of navigate, at least as a starting point. I find that part of what's difficult about this planning process and aging and figuring out what to do is access to resources, and it becomes overwhelming. Deb, you know this so well, obviously, because you put all the resources together. So, your website too, huge help to families. But when you go to Google, for instance, you get inundated and you're not sure what is legitimate and what is not and what is accurate, what applies to you. So, gather some information. But I think the other thing to know is that you don't have to know all your questions, right? Just be able to tell us about you and your love and your family, and then we can make sure that you're asking the right questions and looking at the right things.
I love that you answer the questions that people don't even know to ask. That's so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Samantha, I'm so glad you had time to come on and talk about love and share, what do people need to do when they're in that long-term partnership, and how to make sure that everybody's protected. I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was great.
Thank you. Everybody, I just love love, and we can find love at any age, including when we are older adults. And it's important that we honor and respect our partners and our families of choice, and that we ensure that the decisions that we want for our life and our future and our care are set up in such a way that they are legally appropriate, the best financial situation that one can arrange for themselves, and that it's done sooner rather than later. So I know this episode was warm and fuzzy because it's filled with love, but we need more love in this world, right? I am so glad you were all able to join us today and learn how to protect each other as we go forward on this journey together. I look forward to seeing you all again next week. In the meantime, be well and be kind.
If you liked this video, please follow us on social media and subscribe on YouTube. For more information, visit rielderinfo.com or call 401-585-0509. If you have any questions, email deb@rielderinfo.com.